this week in Departmental December, we're looking at the sales department. So we have these two inputs, so October and November for the sales tracker, and we want to look at bringing those together, updating our year-to-date totals and restructuring them a little bit. So first of all, I use one input step, do a wildcard union here, and I've made a couple of changes in that union step 2. I've removed the file paths because that would just be sales department input for both of the tables. And then I've changed this total here from a numeric input, a numeric data type, sorry, to a string data type. And the reason for that, let me show you, is that if we find our total field here and go all the way to the bottom, then we have this year-to-date total in 5 of our rows. And I want the ability to be able to keep that information, because if it was reading in as a number, then these 5 rows would just be nulls instead. So that's kind of my first changes that I've made to the data set. Next, I want to start thinking about, so if I look at this row ID here, then I see that I've got 2 rows for row ID 1. And so, that's continuing throughout the data set because I've got row 1 in November and row 1 in October. So I want to make a unique ID for my whole data set that I have here in Tableau Prep at the moment. So that's the first thing that I want to do. So if I go to my unique row ID step here, then let's see what we're doing. We're using a ranking here. We're ranking based on the table names and the row ID. So the table names in a descending order, so that October is first, and then the row ID in an ascending order, so that we get rows 1 to 315 now, rather than any duplicated row numbers. So that's good. That's exactly what we want. Now we're looking at this unique data structure. So if I just take a look at it, then I see that in order, if we're looking at this October, then we don't know who the salesperson is for these first dates in October, or all these dates in October, sorry, until we get to the bottom and we see that it's Carl. So rather than a fill down challenge, it's more of a fill up challenge. So similar to the methodology that we saw in the hint that was given with the challenge, but just slightly different. So we're going to take just our salesperson and find out what their unique row is. So we've done a little bit of filtering to work that out. Just excluded all the nulls in the salesperson basically field. And we see that everyone has 2 unique row IDs, and that is just because obviously there's October and November as well. Then when we're bringing this back together, then what we have is, from this step here, we want the unique row ID to be less than the unique row ID from this step here. So if we think about Carl there, Carl had in October row number 32. And so the reason that we're doing this sign here is because we want rows 1 to 31 to be associated with 32, and 32 is bigger than 1 to 31. Of course, using this methodology, it means that row 1 to 31 will also be associated, that will also be smaller than, say, is it row 64 that's the next one? So it will also be associated with the next salesperson as well. So there's still some filtering to be done to clean up this data set. We can see how it's exploded to 1,745 rows, but we're on the right tracks basically. So all we need to do now is we need a quick LOD here to look at each of our unique row IDs. So say if we're looking at row 1, we know we want that to be associated with Carl. So we look at our minimum of the unique row ID -1. So that's the unique row ID that would be coming from this step here. So we can see that, okay, good, row 1 is being associated with 32, which we know relates to Carl. And so therefore we just then need to filter to say that we want our min row ID to equal to our unique row ID -1. And that will mean that now the right salesperson is associated with the correct rows. That always feels like magic to me. So hopefully those steps made sense to you. And we're now in the position to be able to use those year-to-date totals that we were thinking about earlier. We only have those for October. So what we need to do is obviously for the October rows, we can just use those year-to-date totals already. We don't need to do any calculations with them. But for the November rows, we will need to work out the monthly totals to add on to those year-to-date totals. So we just filter to just these year-to-date totals. So by looking at the total row and filtering to just the year-to-date total, and then just removing all the additional fields that we don't need. Joining that on, so the reason that we're doing a left join here rather than a inner join was just in case, we had a new salesperson in November that we didn't have in October. And then what we're going to do with that, as we were saying, is create those monthly totals for each salesperson for each month. So summing up the total sales there, and then writing a little calculation to say if our table names equals November, then add that monthly total to the year-to-date total. Otherwise, leave it as just a year-to-date total. Finally, all we need to do is pivot our data so we can get rid of this total field now. We don't need that anymore. We're just going to pivot these road, gravel and mountain bikes into one field. So here we are pivoting that gravel, road and mountain bikes, renaming that field bike type, and then renaming that values field sales. And we get to the output that we're looking for. So hopefully that was a fun, different data structure to work with, and hopefully you enjoyed the challenge. Thanks for watching.